Welcome, everyone. I am Dr. Dream, and you're here for another broadcast of Psychedelics is Medicine. It's a sub podcast of the It's All Good show. And my guest today, I'm just a little bit beside myself. And those of you that know me know that I don't get this way. But my guest is one of the pinnacle pioneers of psychedelic research, and the fact that he's made it to my little corner of the internet and accepted to be on Psychedelics as Medicine is a great honor for me. And so I'm going to try and make my way through this without looking nervous or anything else that would undermine the information that needs to come out. Dennis McKenna is my guest. He is, it's almost, I could read his bio, and certainly, well, I'll touch on a couple things. His research is focused on the interdisciplinary study of Amazonian ethnopharmacology. He has conducted extensive botanical field work in the Peruvian Amazon. So far, I'm not doing very well, but I'm gonna push through this.
Hey, relax.
We're having a conversation. We're just gonna have a conversation here. Dennis, what it all goes back to is back when psychedelics were new for me. And you're a little bit older than I am. You and your brother Terence were like the most, you were the two that were really bringing it to us, those of us that were exploring and everything else. And so I certainly consider that you're on a short list of people who have helped guide the evolution of how humanity understands and works with psychedelic medicines. I got to ask you, back in the day, back in 1974, did you ever think that someone would say that about you?
Well, I not really. I had asked. I didn't really aspire to be known. What got my brother and me interested in psychedelics, and really we first sort of got into it, became acquainted with it in the mid 60s, and we didn't have any agenda. We were just driven by curiosity, and we were a couple of kids growing up in a small town in western Colorado, quite bored, quite alienated from our peers because they were mostly into, the Friday night football game and those sorts of things. Not that I have anything against football, but we were nerds, and we were science fiction nuts, and we were science nuts, and we were curious kids, and my brother was 4 years older than me, and he led me down the primrose path in a lot of ways. He often took the lead, I don't know if you have an elder sibling.
I do.
You do.
Yeah.
Well, if your sibling is influential on you, I wanted to be part of Terrence's parade. Whatever he was interested in, whatever he was doing, I wanted in, and a lot of people in our little town wanted that, but I was his brother, so I had it 24/7. And we had the usual issues that young teenage boys have with each other. We had certainly lots of sibling conflicts, and Terrence was a master torturer, both physically and psychologically, but we got over that. And we discovered that we had these mutual interests and science fiction, the paranormal, time travel, other dimensions, all of this weird stuff, So when psychedelics popped up on the radar, it's like we were ready in a certain way. We were already primed for it. We were not ready. I don't know if anybody's ever ready for psychedelics until they actually have the experience, but our interest was primed. And so this popped up and we thought, oh, this has got to be amazing. And so that was what led us into psychedelics. that it just popped up as one of the most interesting things in our very limited universe at that time.
So
And
give us an
uh,
idea early on. What were those early psychedelic experiences like for you that would end up being, I guess, foundational in where you've gone now?
well, again, Terence was ahead of me by 4 years, and what that meant in terms of those 60 years was that he left Paonia, this town we lived in, for California when he was a junior in high school. He finished his last couple of years of high school in Los Altos, California. He went out there and lived with my aunt and uncle who were teachers at Menlo Park High School, and he just harangued and bugged my parents about going to California. He wanted to be where the action was. And finally they threw up their hands and they said, "All right, go, get out of here." And so he did, and he went to California to start his high school. And in that process, he fell in with some of these similar weirdos, very strange people, very intelligent people, but also with all these esoteric interests and edgy interests. And those people were big influences on Terence and secondarily on me. And they were into psychedelics. Psychedelics was what was happening. Terence, and that's where Terence got his first initiation. There's a couple of pieces about the time that he took morning glory seeds, a really heavy dose of morning glory seeds with his friend Rick Watson in Golden Gate Park, and he got far more than he'd bargained for. I mean, it really worked. Morning glory seeds is not the first psychedelic that I would turn to, but as it turned out, he took enough. They took enough, and they had what really was their first, real unambiguous psychedelic experience. And he's written about this. I can share the text with you at some point if you like. But they had that. What really got us from a place of interest, sort of dispassionate interest, but at some point we crossed a threshold from interest to obsession, I guess you could say. And the drug that triggered that was DMT. And DMT was very rare at that time, but people knew about it, and there was some around. As it turns out, one of Terence's buddies in this new circle in Los Altos was a prodigy chemist, and he actually taught graduate chemistry courses at Stanford, even though he was a high school kid. And but because of him, this fellow, his name was Rick Watson. He was a big influence on Terence, and because of these connections, he had some connections to the Stanford Research Institute. And it turns out at that time they were doing research with DMT at the Stanford Research Institute. So Rick was able to, get a little, I mean, shave a few shavings off the block, as it were, and introduce them to Terence. And that would have been, opinions differ as to when it was, but it was most likely February of 1965 or 1966. And it completely blew Terence's mind. He'd taken LSD, he'd taken these morning glories. There was, he'd taken mescaline. There was the usual, palette of drugs, psychedelics, fairly limited at the time, but those things were available. DMT was a new one, and it just completely blew his mind, literally, because he thought this is impossible for this stuff to exist. The dimensions that open up when you take DMT, these cannot exist. So he was taken with it, and and being steeped in science fiction, both of us, uh, DMT has a lot of some people sometimes say that DMT is more real than real. It puts you into a place that seems just as real, if not more real, than what we call reality. And we, being having that orientation towards science fiction, we understood this in terms of going to another dimension. And we really thought of it that way, not as something that happened necessarily in our brains. It actually like it teleported you into a different place, I mean, not physically, but mentally, certainly. And and that was kind of the model that we understood it in. And I'm, 50 years on, 60 years on, more than that. I'm not sure that that's not correct. I mean, there are people like Andy Gallimore that have looked into this. You may be familiar with his work.
Of course.
Uh, so there's a lot of consensus now, and I don't know if there's a lot of consensus that it's anomalous. DMT is anomalous compared to other psychedelics because it has this effect of completely kind of obviating this reality and replacing it with another, which is completely bizarre and just astonishing. I mean, Andy's latest book is called Death by Astonishment. And that relates to something somebody asked Terence in one of his seminars. Somebody asked, "Can you die from DMT?" And Terry said, "Only if you can die from astonishment," which I think is fairly apt. Um, and Andy, who is younger than us, obviously, oh, almost everybody's younger than us these days, but he's the new pioneer of DMT, and he's done incredible work trying to really sort of characterize this experience, whether it's purely mental or whether it really is some kind of extra dimensional portal, which was our understanding in the 60s when we experienced it, or just what the hell it is. Nobody really knows, even now. But it is certainly astonishing. It remains astonishing.
Absolutely.
Uh, and, you know, and of course it's very widespread in nature. Many of the uh, natural psychedelics that are used indigenously have DMT as the basic principle, like ayahuasca. I mean, the psychedelic component of ayahuasca is DMT, and ayahuasca is essentially an orally active form of DMT. But, when you take ayahuasca, you certainly have and can have very profound psychedelic experiences, but really somewhat less intense and different, really, than taking DMT by smoking the pure substance or however you might ingest it. So DMT was the siren song for us. DMT to Terry and me seemed to be the ultimate mystery. And one of the frustrations we found with smoking DMT was that it was so short.
Right.
And by the time you get to the place and can kind of look around and be astonished, you're already on the way down. It begins to fade off as soon as you've taken that last hit, and then you slowly, return to this reality. We wanted to spend more time in that place to try to understand it. So then we got interested in orally active forms of DMT, the thinking being very naively that, if it's orally ingested, you have a longer period of time. And so that's what led us to go to La Chorrera in 1971. We were looking for this exotic hallucinogen known as ukuhe that was derived from Varroa species. And Varroas are members of the nutmeg family, and they're used as snuffs throughout the Amazon. Many tribes use them as snuffs. And because DMT is not orally active, right, unless you use a monoamine oxidase inhibitor. But there was one tribe that we found out about in a paper by Schultes, the Witoto, that had an orally active preparation from Varroa that they called ukuhe. And when we read about ukuhe, we thought, aha, this is the mystery. This is what we need to go for. We didn't realize at the time, and not every people didn't at that time, around 1969, 70, 71, in that time frame, the importance of the admixture plants in ayahuasca was not really well understood. And of course, we know that ayahuasca is also an orally active form of DMT, and that's due to the admixture plants that contain high levels. And then the vine contains the beta carbonates that are the inhibitors of monoamine oxidase. This was just emerging at that time. Schultes had graduate students in the field who were collecting and sort of sussing out these admixtures. We didn't know about that at the time. And so when this other paper appeared, we thought, well, ukuhe's got to be the mystery, gotta be the one, and we need to get out there and get this stuff, because again, we were convinced that it was not just a drug, that it was some sort of portal to another dimension. So in 1971, we decided to go down to La Chorrera, which was the ancestral home of the Witoto people, and get this ukuhe and check it out. And that's what led us to go there. Well, if you're familiar with our mythos, the Terry and Denny mythos, you know that when we got to La Chorrera, uh, and there's a whole story about what it took to get there. It was quite an adventure. But when we got to La Chorrera, we found this tiny little mission village, and there was a pasture around the village, and they brought in these Cebu cattle, the white humpbacked cattle from India. And they produce dung, like all cattle, and that dung is the preferred substrate for Psilocybe cubensis, which is like the global plant, pan-tropical psilocybin mushroom. And when we got to La Chorrera, happened to hit the rainy season, happened to hit it just at the right time. And every cow pie in that pasture had big, beautiful clusters of Psilocybe cubensis growing out of it. And we had very little experience. We had very little experience with psilocybin at that time. I mean, we'd taken a low dose on our way to La Chorrera, but nothing to write home about. But when we got to La Chorrera, these mushrooms were everywhere. And we were very cavalier about it. We thought, I mean, we knew what they were, of course, but we had our sights fixed on the mystery, this other exotic secret Witoto drug. And so we kind of thought, well, we can play around with these mushrooms, while we're waiting for the real mystery to show up, make the connection with the right curandero who knows how to prepare this stuff. And so that was the way we went into it. And, we didn't give the mushrooms the respect that they deserved. We looked at it as a recreational distraction. Well, we started eating quite a bit of it, pretty much on a daily basis. In fact, we pretty much incorporated it into our diet because there wasn't that much else to eat, actually. and, and uh, and the mushrooms quickly made it very clear that they were the mystery and that we needed to pay attention, and we did. We started paying attention. Our quest for ukuhe kind of got backburnered, and we focused our attention on the mushrooms, which were downloading incredible amounts of information, scarcely believable amounts of information about how you could basically transform your biophysical being, and use sound, which you could hear on high doses of the mushrooms, by imitating these sounds. The mushrooms told us, they assured us that you could affect these changes in our DNA and in our neurochemistry and all that. And, and if you're familiar with our story, I could leave it there. We don't have to go down that rabbit hole, but most people are familiar with it. And if I've written about it, Terence has written about it. His book, True Hallucinations, is probably the textbook for this, and my memoir, The Brotherhood of the Screaming Abyss, which I published in 2012, that unpacks it as well and brings my perspective to it. So that that's how we got into this, and it was very disruptive and transforming type of experience, and it affected our whole lives. I mean, I sometimes have said I was 20 when this happened. Terence was 24. We were just kids, we knew nothing. But we've lived under the shadow of La Chorrera for ever since. It was a incredible juncture in our life, and it set us off on this trajectory, which has really been the one we've been on ever since. And we traveled it together in a lot of ways, and Terence, departed this plane in 2000, but we worked together up until that time. Uh, Sometimes different, and we had a different trajectory. After La Chorrera, when we finally did come down and get our feet back on the ground to some degree, you know, I, I mean, we were both completely astonished. The experiment that we postulated would transform our bodies into superconducting superhumans and end history and collapse the space-time continuum and all those things. None of that happened, fortunately for the rest of the world, probably. But when we came away from La Chorrera, Terence became more convinced than ever that we were on the right track. I sort of retreated into skepticism, and I didn't reject what had happened because you couldn't reject it. But I thought, number one, we don't know enough. And my response, and we had sort of conceived this as a scientific experiment, well, it wasn't an experiment in any conventional sense, but that's how we conceive it. But after La Chorrera, I thought, well, we need to know how to do science before we can reject science, because Terence was saying, well, science can never explain this. It's useless to even try. It's something so far beyond that. Scientific approach is not not going to be useful. And my response was basically, well, we can't reject science because we haven't done science, We need to learn how to do science before we could reject it. And so that kind of set my direction towards studying. I returned to my undergraduate studies, but I shifted from comparative religions and anthropology. I started studying pharmacology, chemistry, botany, all of these somewhat harder sciences. And that's the path I followed, for the rest of my life. So I sort of this partnership, I'm like the scientist brother, and Terence is like the philosopher brother,
You
and
kind of became the more grounded one, possibly.
well, yes, I guess you could say that. I guess you could say that. Uh,
So,
but
Dennis,
Terence,
I want to ask, it's 5+ decades of experiences and research, how has your understanding of this field shifted in that time?
Well, I mean, there have been a lot of phases that it's gone through. Initially, back in the 60s, all of this was underground. These were prohibited. Everybody who was into this lived in fear because we were basically criminals. We were dealing with controlled substances that were, you know, quite illegal. So you had to be very careful. So I think paranoia, kind of suffused the whole um, psychedelic meme sphere, if you will, and it kind of continued that way for a while. But I mean, I don't think anyone who was ever seriously interested in psychedelics backed away from it because they were afraid of the legal consequences. It certainly didn't dissuade us. And in fact, when we, a few years after we returned from La Chorrera, lots of things happened at La Chorrera, and many speculations and metaphysical constructs and Terence's time wave and all of this, which is a very interesting idea, which I've also more or less, I admire it, but I don't accept it. But the one thing we did do at La Chorrera that had the impact is we had the presence of mind to bring the spores back of the mushrooms. And over the next few years, we fiddled around with that and we learned how to grow them. That's really very simple now, but we didn't know how to do it at that time. And so we played with this. And eventually we found a way to grow small amounts of these mushrooms. And so we had the mushrooms back in our lives again. And we a motivation for that was we wanted other people to have these experiences because we were thinking these experiences that we've had were so incredible, so astonishing. We need confirmation, from other people that we were not totally crazy. Or confirmation that we were totally crazy, but we're crazy too, and so we published this little book, the Psilocybin Magic Mushroom Growers Guide in 1976. This year happens to be the 50th anniversary of that. And basically, it was just a little pamphlet. There wasn't much to it, but it was the method to grow these mushrooms. And we had a publisher and or press in Berkeley brought it out initially, and it put the techniques into the hands of many people. And any reasonably focused, you know, nerd, any freshman in high school or college with a little patience can figure out how to grow these things, and many of them did. I imagine many conversations about what is Johnny doing down in the basement? Oh, I don't know, some kind of science fair project. I don't know, something about growing mushrooms. you know, and so so I guess culturally, uh, the importance of that was that it got mushrooms became widely known and became widely accessible. Anybody with a little patience and who could buy a pressure cooker and get the materials that you needed to grow it, started growing it. So mushrooms kind of kept the whole conversation alive through the 70s and 80s when, psychedelics were frowned upon, to say
Right.
the least. I mean, but somehow people didn't have quite the same attitude toward mushrooms as they did toward these very scary psychedelics like LSD, for example, which was a big bugaboo, I mean, of course it's not scary. All these things need to be used respectfully and thoughtfully, but mushrooms didn't really carry that kind of cultural um, opprobrium, I guess you could say. And so it kept the conversation alive. And many people were able, their first psychedelic experience was with mushrooms.
Hmm.
And mushrooms are probably the ideal psychedelic for your initiation in a certain sense. More, I'd say, than LSD, uh, more than DMT, even. I mean, DMT has the virtue that, it only lasts 20 minutes, so there's not too much time to get into trouble with it. But psychedelics are, psilocybin is gentle, usually, but profoundly psychedelic, highly visionary, has many of the extraterrestrial or extra dimensional characters of DMT. Of
Hmm.
course, psilocybin, the active principle of psilocybin is psilocin, which is uh, almost identical to DMT, chemically, but just enough difference that hydroxy group on the 4 position makes it orally active. So you don't need a monoamine oxidase inhibitor. So the conversation about psychedelics kind of continued because these mushrooms were available, and Terence was very much in public talking about these things, through the 70s, most of the 80s, a good deal of the 90s, and then gradually in the 90s and the early aughts, the uh, psychedelics began to get a second look from medicine, from qualified investigators. Rick Strassman
Right.
uh, de deserves a lot of credit because he did the first clinical study with DMT, and uh, uh, and so you know had made amazing discoveries and brought that into kind of the respectability because he was a psychiatrist, he's a doctor, and he had permission to do this work. And so he opened up the door to research, really, legitimate, so-called legitimate research, meaning not illegal and sometimes funded research. And uh, and then, of course, in the early aughts, around 2006, Roland Griffith's group at Johns Hopkins kind of followed up. They did these studies with psilocybin at the end of life. That was the initial sort of therapeutic target rationale, helping people come to terms with their impending death. And it turned out to be extremely helpful for people in that situation. So that's really those two things sparked the opening up of science to research on psychedelics, a lot of it reluctant, but they were kind of forced into it. Now, of course, it's proliferated and there's all kinds of research. And it's ironic because these a lot of these substances are remain illegal,
Right.
you know, and yet there are companies with millions of dollars of investor capital that are trying to develop these things therapeutically, and that's the current situation.
Does it surprise you how it's proliferated in this day and age? I mean, back when you were, early on with DMT, it was probably very difficult to get. I know when I was looking for it in the 90s, it was even a challenge, and now it's everywhere, available anywhere.
Now it's everywhere. Now you can order preloaded vape cartridges with DMT, I mean, yeah, that's just the difference that it's made, so it's much more accepted. And the, science, I think, is inherently a conservative discipline, so they're reluctant to accept change and accept innovation, but they've pretty much, largely because of Roland Griffith's work, Rick Strassman's work was not therapeutically oriented. It was more of a observational study
Mm-hmm.
and a very valuable one at that, because his subjects describe these dimensions and these, very strange experiences, and that was useful. Roland's group had a therapeutic rationale. What is this stuff good for? What can it do? And of course, initially it was anxiety, existential anxiety at the end of life, but then further studies showed that it was good for intractable depression, PTSD, uh, all of those sorts of things. So it has this therapeutic um, application, and medicine is more comfortable with that, to be able to say, well, this is actually something that can be used to, correct or help therapeutically with some mental disorder of some kind. Uh, I think, though, with this preoccupation and this focus on the therapeutics, which incidentally is also where the money is, right? So the capitalist side of it, they uh, they fund research on psychedelics because hopefully their hope is from the purely monetary standpoint is they can come up with either a patented drug or a patented protocol and integrate that into medicine. Uh, what is sort of sacrificed in that and maybe deliberately kind of pushed aside are all the things that preoccupied Terence and me in the 60s. I mean, what about that extra dimensional thing? Is there anything to this? And if you look at Andy Gallagher's work, you have to wonder what the hell is going on? And this is not open to polite discussion in psychedelic research circles. It's a bit much for them because it challenges just about everything we think we know about reality. And science is uncomfortable with that. Science likes to think that it knows things, and it does. It knows a lot of things. But its scope of, the scope of scientific understanding in general is limited. And I think that's something that psychedelics really put into your face. A constant message that I get from psychedelics, especially ayahuasca, because that's been my primary medicine for most of my life. But the message is, remember how little you know. You know, don't assume that you know more. Sometimes the message is gentle, remember how little you know, and don't get full of yourself. Other times the message is not so gentle. It's like, you don't know shit, you know, and don't forget that, and I think that's good. I think that humility and an acknowledgement of how little we know is a good trait in a scientist, you know, and often it's too rare. Science is an incredibly powerful set of methods and techniques for asking questions of nature that you can, in a very systematic way, that you can verify or not. That's the whole rationale. Construct hypotheses and then try to knock them down, try to find out what the gaps are. That's a very powerful approach to understanding. And but when it comes to something like psychedelics, it's like, well, where do you start? And so. Uh, Science doesn't really address those things. The
But
work of Andy Gallimore is a good example, but then what do you do with that? Plenty of people have confirmed that it really does put you into a very peculiar place, what seems like a place. And uh,
let's have you weigh in on that, Dennis. Is it the internal workings of our mind, or are we going someplace that already exists?
that's the big question. Yeah.
How do you answer it?
Well, I mean, the only honest answer is I don't know, and I don't think anyone knows. But I think there is reason to think, and again, Andrew Gallimore has thought about this a lot. And the interesting thing about the interesting thing, many things that are interesting, but one thing about DMT is you reliably uh, sort of go into this place, and there are entities there. There are other consciousnesses there. Uh, at least there appear to be,
Right.
and they're not human. Um, Terence talks about the self-transforming elf machines. Maybe some people see that. I haven't seen a lot of elf machines myself, and you don't even necessarily see something, but you definitely have a sense of another intelligence or many intelligences that are in this space that are pretty much delighted to see you. They're happy that you're there. It's like you poked your head through a membrane or something, and you're looking around, and there's like this circus going on. There's all these things going on, and these entities, and they're saying, "Yeah, wow, you're happy. We're happy you're here. Look at this. Look at that. Look at that." And what to make of that? And the model for a long time, I mean, naturally, the supposition is that, these entities are extraterrestrial or something like that. But I think if you really step back from that and think how likely is it, given the I mean, it's possible there are extraterrestrial civilizations that have overcome the light barriers and all that. But civilizations, although I think there are many probably populating the galaxy, I think they're rare and I think they're quite distant. They're not really in communication. I think Andy's latest theory is much more plausible, although I'm not sure I completely understand it. But his idea is that there is a level of reality, a quantum level, which is not localized in space and time because of the non-locality, non-local nature of it. It's something that's there. It's a layer of experience that really permeates the cosmos, and time and space does not make any difference. It's in this layer, and DMT may enable you to penetrate into that dimension, penetrate that membrane, and spend time in this, which is always there. I mean, it permeates everything. It's sort of like, the quantum field of consciousness or
Right.
something. But you need DMT. DMT is like the lens that lets you look at it and bring it into focus temporarily. I think it's a good model. Uh, I think it's plausible. The question is always with science, all hypotheses are provisional. How do you test this hypothesis? How
Right.
do you go from interesting speculation to actual evidence that this is what's going on? And how would you even approach that? This is way beyond me. Maybe Andy has a better idea. People are thinking about this. There are chat groups, I participate in. You may as well, called the Sentient Others, and a lot of discussion is going on. Uh, and But at the end of the day, nobody really knows.
So I had some people on the show not too long ago out of Colorado doing work with extended state DMT. Have you
Extended
followed
state
that?
DMT. Yeah, yeah. Well, I haven't done extended state DMT, but
Any
this is
interest?
um, probably interest, yes. Probably not. I wouldn't be doing it because I'm I'm an old guy now, and I don't want to put my heart and other parts under too much stress. So my days of actually taking DMT and something in a pure form are probably over. Uh, I take ayahuasca. I don't find any problems, but there are people exploring this extended state. And when I heard about this, I was very skeptical. I was I was skeptical from a safety standpoint. I was wondering if maybe that's a good idea to really shift your neurochemistry for a long period. There's a reason you're not on DMT all the time, and
Right.
it may be that, this is hard for the nervous system, and that it could be dangerous. But apparently not as dangerous as I thought. People are doing this. Why are they doing it? What is the rationale for it, other than our original rationale, which led us to La Chorrera? Just we want to be able to spend longer periods of this
Exactly.
in this dimension and understand it better. And that's what that's about. Uh, and people are able to do that. Uh, but then the question is, so you have these experiences, and then what? I mean, what do you do with the information? Or is there anything to be done with the information? Or do you just say, well, yeah, there's a really just around the corner, there's a really weird dimension to be experienced, and it's open to almost anybody who wants to take the pipe or try the extended DMT. Anyone can experience it. And that's an interesting thing about DMT. Uh, I mean, DMT, of course, is the main ingredient in many, in theogens, many indigenous psychedelics. But in some ways, at these high levels, uh, it's the experience is not culture bound, so much. I mean, we can't really say, but a Yanomami or a post 20th century neuroscientist or someone like that, they see the same things. They definitely seem to go into this dimension that appears to have a reality that has little to do with you. I mean, you're not having you can be very sort of dispassionate observer of these phenomena. So it's like you're calm, you're not excited, you are yourself, you're in your usual state of mind. But then your sensorium is just flooded with this incredible input of being immersed in this cosmic carnival kind of, and it has very much that feel to it.
Let me ask you, I also had Danny Goler on the show recently with the DMT and the laser. What have you tried that? And what's your perspective on that whole thing?
I haven't tried it. I've heard of it. I haven't tried it. Well, I don't know. I'd say I'm not qualified to really comment on that. I mean, again, he's trying to point to something external and objective that you could replicably that you could replicate, and is similar to other people's experience. So I haven't tried it, and I'm not sure what it means, but I encourage the work. I mean, I think it's you know I mean, psychedelics and trying to understand these experiences are is something that amateurs can do. I mean, if there is such a thing. You don't have to be a neuroscientist necessarily, or a shaman or whatever. We're all amateurs when it comes to trying to understand DMT. You know, uh, but a further question is, so apparently this material, DMT, opens up some kind of access to some kind of thing that presents as another place, another reality, and so on. And but then the question is, okay, you can accept that, and the temptation is to ask, so what? What are the implications? What do we change how we live, what we do, in the light of this? I'm not sure. I mean, if the information that was downloaded in these states actually made a difference, I mean, where's the blueprints for the fusion reactor? Where's the blueprints for the starship or the time machine? They don't download that kind of information to you. And is that what we're looking for? Well, I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm too technologically preoccupied. I think it may just be that the DMT is a a portal to these places, and DMT permeates nature. I mean, that's an interesting thing about it is it's such a simple molecule. It's only two steps from tryptophan, right? So DMT, tryptophan is universal. It's one of the amino acids that goes into protein. So every living thing on the planet contains tryptophan. And tryptophan can be converted to DMT by two enzymes in two trivial steps. One, removing the carboxyl group from tryptophan to give you tryptamine, and then sticking a couple methyl groups onto that to give you dimethyltryptamine. And the enzymes that do that are just pretty much standard in any cellular machinery. This is a very common reaction. So DMT is very, very common in nature, and many, many plants contain it. We contain it. Probably everything contains it to some degree. And so it's kind of interesting to think that, this simple amino acid just two steps away is this unsuspected other dimension, and that you can visit, and then you can look around, but what do you bring back with it? Well, you bring back a few things. You bring back an understanding that what we think that most of what we think we understand about reality is probably wrong, which is a healthy place to be. It doesn't seem to result in any practical uh, application, and if there is, I'd like to know about it. Do people come back with ideas for technologies or whatever that they're able to implement? It may just be nature's way of reminding us that reality has a vaster scope than we even suspect. And maybe its message is just this, you monkeys should be a little more humble because you don't really know what's going on, and that's a good lesson. And that's a good lesson for, I think, scientists particularly, and science as a discipline to absorb, because what happened, the way science is practiced these days, it's not pure. It's not in its purest state, science is a systematic search for truth, right? Really, that's the scientific mission, is the search for truth. But science is a big deal. Science is big business. There's
Right.
prestige, there's money, there's applications, there's all these things. That distorts the purity of the scientific mission. And it's inevitable that it would. But just stepping back from that, maybe the fact that it's just a reminder of the limitations of our knowledge, and that's useful, and particularly, I think psilocybin also is quite useful in that way. Psilocybin is not as challenging as DMT for most people.
Right.
And but it can also be a lens for looking at reality in uh, interesting ways. And it has often, if you take psilocybin in nature, it brings the background forward. And you notice processes going on in the natural environment that are always there, but you're primed, you're evolved basically to filter most of that stuff out, because it's not immediately essential to your survival. But
Right.
the mushrooms or the DMT lets you demolish that, disable that default mode network, disable those filters, and then you open up your apprehension to a much wider scope of what's going on. And that is useful. That is useful both as a reminder of the limitations of our knowledge, but also as a tool for looking at processes in nature and understanding them in it from a different perspective. Just in the same way that a telescope or a microscope might change your perspective on on nature.
Right.
Look at a telescope or a microscope, you see things about nature that you don't suspect are there. And the same is true of the psilocybin lens that you can use to, like a scientific instrument, to examine nature and understand it better. And you know, and of course we're part of nature. So the added bonus for that is we understand ourselves better when we do that.
It's been fascinating for me. My first came across DMT in 1994. And it's been, I call it a mentor of mine. I've had literally had it in my field for me that entire time. Since 94, I met Terence in 95 at Palenque at an ethnobotany conference with Christian Ratch and Ralph Metzner and all these great minds. And it was
Yeah,
really fascinating. I feel like anytime that I do DMT, which is once a week, once every other week, that there's downloads happening. Now, what access I have to that afterwards is limited.
yeah.
Um, but I do feel like there's something going on that's expanding me. And so it's been, I would consider an ally over the years, and same with psilocybin. Um, and it's a joy to me that in 2025 and 2026 I have a podcast called the DMT Chronicles and Psychedelics as Medicine, and I get to publicly talk about this and without any fear of anything. When I met your brother and everyone back in Palenque in 1995, I was struck with how paranoid they all were.
Yeah. Well, there was a
And it made
reason
sense.
for
I
it.
mean, yeah, no, it made sense, but it was like it was an overwhelming energetic that seemed to take away, from my perspective, the joy of the experience and of sharing it. And of course, I don't have that energetic to deal with now. And at the time, it was a whole different thing for me. Dennis, I want you to speak about the research institute that you're a founding board member of. What is that all about, and what are you all doing?
Well, you're probably talking about the McKenna Academy.
I was going to talk about the Heffter Research Institute first.
Okay. Okay, right. Well, the Heffter Research Institute is uh I am have been on the board since the founding, which was about 1993 or in that time frame that it was founded. And the Heffter Research Institute was basically a bunch of scientists, clinicians, chemists, neuroscientists, and so forth, ethnopharmacologists like me. And the focus was basically scientific research on psychedelics for therapeutic uses and to explore all that. That's what the Heffter Research Institute was all about. That's why it was founded. And in the in the period since it's existed, we've done that. It's been very successful at raising funds for research, and that turns out to be the model. The institute, there are many very qualified people who are on the board, and what we do is we find investigators who are qualified, and we try to get funds to support their research. For example, Roland Griffiths, who was on our board for many years, but much of the work that was done with his group with psilocybin was funded through the Heffter Research Institute. So we were effective at raising funds to work with established investigators, usually at university settings, to do basic research and also clinical research to develop psychedelics.
Still active today?
Uh, the Heffter Institute is active. I'm still on the board. I'm very little involved. There's a younger generation, so I'm sort of the elder iconic guy who doesn't know when to leave. I'm still on the board. I I don't contribute very much to it, but I'm happy that it's going forward, and I'm happy to be affiliated with it. And of course, many of the original founders are old friends and recognized in this field, like Dave Nichols and Charles Grobe and people like that. We're all the old timers, and we're all on the Heffter board still. And probably some of the younger folks wish that we'd, take our retirement and get out of there. But, we like to stick around so that we can
Sure.
irritate the younger people and, keep that perspective.
It's a
And
tough.
they're doing good work. The
Good.
Hifter is very much alive.
Tell us about the McKenna Academy.
Well, the McKenna Academy, another nonprofit, that's kind of what I have been, that's the horse I've been riding since about 2020. 2020, 2019, I moved to Canada, and I founded the McKenna Academy in 2020 as a nonprofit, originally incorporated in Canada, but then we switched to the States. So we're a 501c3 nonprofit in the States. And our scope, our mission is much more plant related. How do I how do I summarize it in a nutshell? We're trying to protect and understand indigenous knowledge about psychedelics, and we're trying to bridge that with scientific knowledge. These are not opposed spheres of knowledge. They really complement each other. The indigenous way of knowing and understanding psychedelics and understanding reality in general is not the same as the scientific perspective. And they reinforce and enrich each other in a certain way. I mean, indigenous people have a certain perspective of understanding of reality that you can't really call scientific. And science can benefit from that expanded sort of perspective. So we're involved. It turned out to be we're mostly an educational organization. That seems to be what we're doing. We've developed a curriculum uh, that we offer online courses in ethnobotany. We're developing a curriculum in psychedelic medicines. We're developing other topic areas, that we can offer. And then we do seminars and symposia, that sort of thing, all basically related to more or less the indigenous use of psychedelics and new discoveries. We have we have a series of symposia that actually started in 2017 before there was a McKenna Academy formally, but they're called ESPD, which stands for Ethnopharmacologic Search for Psychoactive Drugs. And in 2017, I decided to, well, let me back up again. In 1967, there was a symposium sponsored by the National Institute of Mental Health that was held in San Francisco in 1967 called the Ethnopharmacologic Search for Psychoactive Drugs. And it was a closed conference, but all the big names of the time were there, like Richard Schultes and Andrew Weil and people like that were on that. And that book was very influential. The only thing the taxpayers ever got out of it was a book. It was a closed conference, but I got a copy at the age of 18, and that opened my made me understand that this was a real discipline, ethnopharmacology, and that there was some good work going on. So the book was very influential in my decision to pursue a career in ethnopharmacology. And so in 1960, in 2017, well, the government was supposed to stage follow-up conferences after this 67 initial 67 conference, but they never did. You know, the war on drugs intervened. They became kind of embarrassed that they never had anything to do with any of this crazy stuff. So there was never a follow-up conference. So in 2017, I decided, well, hell with it. I'll do a conference. And I did. I brought a bunch of people together and we did the first ESPD 50 conference, the 50th anniversary commemoration of the original 67 conference. So we did that and we published the proceedings of that conference and we actually republished the original proceedings of the 67 conference. And then 5 years later, or 5 years after 2017, we did ESPD 55, and that was in 2022. And we've just published the proceedings of that. Now we're working on ESPD 60, which will be in uh, May 2027. And so you can go on our website. Our website is McKenna.academy and look at all these things. Look at the ESPD conferences, look at the online courses that we have. Last year, we did a summit on coca. We did a symposium in South America on coca, which is not a psychedelic, but certainly an interesting plant.
Mhm.
And that's there too. So most of what we have done has been open to the public. We don't really have paywalls. Well, we charge for the courses. We got to keep the lights on somehow, so people
Course.
pay for the courses. But all the lectures and everything are pretty much open access, and there's a lot of material there. So we just keep going, and that's another project that we're working on, and now we have some other partners is under this rubric of what I call bionosis, which is means life knowledge, bio plus gnosis, life knowledge, and that has to do with a project in Peru at the university in Iquitos. I worked many years, continue to work with a botanist there whose name is Juan Ruiz. And he's an incredible walking library. He knows everything there is to know about the plants, the medicinal plants, the practices of the region, but he never writes anything down. It's all in his head. So we're trying to document his knowledge and we're trying to digitize this herbarium, which is pretty much what herbaria try to do now. They digitize their collections. And recently, we started a collaboration with another group, which is called the Amazonia Bio Vault Foundation, and they're involved also in the digitization. So there's this gathering partnership, and we're going to try to save this herbarium. And we published we did a documentary about all this in I think it was 2022. It was called Bionosis Bridges to Ancestral Wisdom, and you can watch that on the website. Um, I don't know. I can send you links to all these. I don't know how you do your podcast. We usually put a bunch of links on the episode page. I'll
Yeah,
send you
I would love that.
more links than you know what to do with, but
So this
lots of
kind of
links.
plays into my question that I had about how we honor indigenous knowledge without exploiting it, which is as
This
important
is
as anything.
That's the conundrum, right? You have to respect this knowledge. You have to help protect it. We have to avoid colonialism and that sort of thing. We people outside these cultures, in the so-called developed world or the global world, we don't own this information, and we shouldn't delude ourselves that we do. The knowledge belongs to the indigenous people. They don't really have the perspective about owning that kind of stuff, but we want to preserve the knowledge. We want to work with these communities, indigenous communities, and in our case, mostly in the Amazon, to protect their knowledge. And the knowledge cannot be separated from the habitats and the species that they use. The habitats are also, habitats are where the plants are. It's also where the people live. So
Right.
these ecosystems need to be preserved and not despoiled. And in my own experience working in the field, I don't I don't feel, I mean, the indigenous people who hold this knowledge, they're not jealous about it. It's not something that they want to keep secret from the outside world. In some cases they do, but in most cases they're happy to share what they know. They just want to be recognized for it and not be ripped off. And this is the juncture at which the difficulties come up with the say the corporate exploitation of psychedelics for profit and that sort of thing, or the development of new psychedelics that are not traditional but maybe based on traditional medicines, and it's a delicate area of relations. But I think the important thing is uh, to form good relationships of trust with these indigenous communities and help them share their knowledge without trying to appropriate it. That's the tricky part. Uh, and it's very complicated. I mean, as you know, there's now there's quite a lot of economic activity around, say, ayahuasca tourism and that
I was
sort
just
of
going
thing.
to say, yeah.
Well, I am guilty. I've organized ayahuasca retreats for a long time, and I saw people undergo amazing healing experiences. It was very beneficial in most cases for the people. But then I sort of begin to wonder, is this really the model? Is this an exploitive model? And how do you because in some ways, with many gringos or whatever coming to these communities, it's an economic disruptor in some ways. I mean, there are economic benefits for the community, but not everybody,
Right.
and there's pressure on the plants. Ayahuasca is not yet an endangered species by any means. There's lots of ayahuasca, but something like iboga or peyote or plants like that, they are endangered species due to overharvesting. And
Or the
so we have to
Bufo
make sure.
alvarius, the frogs, what they're doing with the frogs.
Oh, the frogs are a whole other area, yeah, that we're concerned about. We're
Yeah.
very concerned about that. And
So
and this we just need perspective. We just need a certain attitude of respect where, I've often, I mean, a big sort of trope that I have, I've been saying, is don't go to South America to get the medicine, bring the medicine to North America and establish wellness centers or retreat centers in North America. And there are such centers. This is being done, but find ways to make those legal and lightly
Right.
regulate and work with the indigenous communities to produce the medicines and import them to North America. Let the curanderos come if they want and do their ceremonies here, and make it a more reciprocal thing. And really, all it takes is, I mean, this can be done. And I look forward to the day when every community has one of these psychedelic wellness centers, that is operated in partnership with the local community and the indigenous communities that work together. Many people on your podcast already know about ICERs and the World Ayahuasca forums that they do every few years. Are you aware of ICERs? The
Yes.
ICEERS. They're having their next ayahuasca forum in September this year. I believe it's September 12th to 16th or something in Girona, Spain. They're based in Spain. It's a Spanish NGO. That's a wonderful opportunity for anyone interested in ayahuasca if you can make it there. The last one happened before COVID came, so they've skipped. The last one was in 2019
Hmm.
and also in Girona, and I was there. I've been to all of them so far. The one in 2019, 10,000 people showed up. So, that's a lot of people to be interested in ayahuasca. That's comparable to the number that showed up for the last MAPS conference,
Right.
So if you're interested in ayahuasca and you want to be educated about it, I recommend this ICERS conference. If you could get to Europe, that's getting harder and harder, but
Will you
that
be at
that
this next one?
I'll be there. Absolutely. Yeah.
Nice. Let me ask, because this all kind of leads to one of my questions here. What concerns you most about the current psychedelic renaissance, as it were?
Well, I don't know. I think that capitalism and, particularly predatory capitalism and the preoccupation with making money uh, is potentially poison to this movement. There's not a lot of profit to be made here, but there are a lot of companies that think there's a lot of profit. And I think that I think there's very little profit to be made in producing the drugs. That's not really a business model. I mean, a drug that you take maybe two or three times in your life, they pharma wants drugs that you take four times a day for the rest of your
Right.
life. It's a different model. So the substances themselves are not profitable. Uh, so what they're selling basically are the practices, the therapeutic protocols, and so forth. But the clinical protocols, the way that psychedelics are often used in a clinical setting, it's a long way from the indigenous setting. It's not ritualized. And we know people that know psychedelics know the importance of set and setting. So I think that uh, the clinicians should uh, take a leaf from the indigenous practices and not necessarily imitate them or ape them, but look at how they do it and look at what they could learn when they try to implement these substances in a therapeutic way. And the other issue is costs, I mean, because these are all tied up with biomedicine and you have to have FDA approval and you have to do clinical trials, you have to do all of this stuff, which raises the cost. So you create a demographic where the wealthy can afford these therapies and the not so wealthy can't. It's not accessible to them in a legal way. And that's a shame, that it should be something that's accessible to all people because many people who are probably most people who could really benefit most from psychedelics can't afford
Right.
to, spend $30,000 for a clinical experience. So lately I mean, what I've been my megaphone, I've been talking about symbiosis a lot and what these relationships with these plants, which have been part of the human experience probably for millions of years. You can make that case, at least for psilocybin mushrooms. You can
Right.
make a strong case. And so these traditions are an example of symbiosis, a close alliance of our species with non-human species for mutual benefits. That's what symbiosis is. And there are lots of ways to implement symbiosis. You can just go around the biomedical industrial complex, and this is what I've been arguing lately, that you can approach it from a community-oriented standpoint. For example, one example, which a lot of people will be familiar with, is the Telluride Mushroom Conference, which happens every August. And that's a community of mushroom enthusiasts and all kinds of mushrooms, not just psychedelic mushrooms. But there's tremendous expertise there about psychedelic mushrooms. There are people there with a lot of expertise in how to use these psychedelic mushrooms, how to find them, how to grow them. This is stuff that you can do on a community basis. I mean, this is like returning to the way that plant knowledge and traditional knowledge was always exchanged. It wasn't exchanged through a corporate mechanism. It was what people exchanged. They exchanged plants and information across the back fences of their gardens. This is the way it needs to be. The psychedelic renaissance need to be community-based and nature-based. You could go find these mushrooms in nature. Almost every ecosystem has psilocybin mushrooms. If you look at Paul Stamets's book, which is a fantastic book if people do not know about it, it's called Psilocybin Mushrooms and Their Natural Habitats. It is the definitive source book for information about psilocybin. And I tell people, well, yeah, it is that. It's also a manifesto for the symbiotic revolution. And that's what we need to do. The symbiotic revolution, we need to reassert the right to symbiosis, the right to form an alliance with any plant, fungus, bug, bacteria, any other organism that we want to form a relationship with. That should be a fundamental right, that transcends all legal parameters. And it goes beyond human rights. It's a human right, but it's an organismic right. And so we should propagate the idea of forming symbiotic communities, and that includes psychedelics as partners in this, not just the medicines that we exploit, but the medicines that actually are part of this community. And I suppose I'm beginning to sound a little wild now. Maybe maybe I'm losing, but that's the message basically. Exchange the information. The community is extremely powerful because it's not strictured by any of these corporate and profit-driven frameworks. There are, for example, the American Mycological Society, which is just like its name says, an informal society of mostly amateurs, people interested in fungi for all sorts of reasons. There are like 90 or 100 chapters of this throughout the US and Canada. Join the American Mycological Association or join your local garden club, or go to your local botanical garden and talk to people. They're tremendously knowledgeable people in these places. They're eager to share knowledge, and that's how we make this revolution happen. We do it very quietly, over the back fence kind of approach, and pretty soon the symbiotic revolution will succeed. It can't be stopped.
Right.
And no one will want to stop it until they realize, hey, this is actually changing, societal consciousness on a fairly significant scale. So we'll see.
No, this is excellent, Dennis. I appreciate this. It's excellent opportunity for me to put a plug out there for United Plant Savers.
United Plant Savers, that's one
My
of the
dear
ones.
friend Susan Leopold is the executive director, and she was with me in the Ethnobotany Conference in 1995, and she's been doing some amazing work. And we'll put all these links in the
Right.
in the description. Now, this is. Go ahead.
Well, yes, exactly. Do that. The United Plant Savers is one of the ones. ICERS certainly put that up, and many organizations like this. The American Mycological Society is another good one. There's lots of them, and people don't necessarily know about these resources, unless
Right.
they're already sort of
Tapped in.
in them. So yeah, that's a very
Well, I'm going to ask that you
community
send me
useful thing.
some links and some different things also, and I'll compile some. This is we're at the close here, and it's gone longer than I bet you planned, but I'm certainly thrilled that it went this long. This is a sub podcast of the It's All Good show, and as such, I think this is an appropriate final question for you. What gives you the most hope about where humanity is headed?
That's a tough question in the current existential situation that we find ourselves in. I guess what gives me the most hope is that this is a very dynamic situation. We're not finished yet, and every day something astonishing happens that has never before happened in the history of the universe. That's what gives me hope.
All right. I like that. I want to thank you for making your way here and agreeing to this. It wouldn't have happened without the help of your cousin, Sharon,
Oh,
who
yes.
put a good word in for me. And so she was a fabulous conversation that I got to have. And we're hoping to see her when we go to Europe in August and September. And so I thank her. I thank you. And
Do
this
you
is
do you happen to be going to the ICERS conference?
no, it's not on the agenda.
Okay.
But things could shift. One never knows.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Well,
we will be in. We're going to the Total Solar Eclipse Festival in Iceland, and
oh,
then we're
wow.
going to Barcelona. And so I think Spain is a little earlier in the trip than the conference, and we're doing 7 other countries and doing some events. My wife Stephanie and I do sound healing and energetic type of work. I believe we'll be doing something in Damanhur and London. We've got a couple of bookings, and then we're going to see our favorite band in Marrakesh. It's kind of a working vacation, light on the working.
Sounds great. Sounds like
Right.
a wonderful, wonderful journey. I haven't been back to Europe since, since the ICERS conference. So that's over 5 years. So I'm looking forward to it too. And thank you so much for having me. This has been a wonderful conversation. I've given you barely a chance to get a word in edgewise. I'm sorry. I get off on a roll and I just rant. But
Your level of sharing and everything, it was worth me just taking it all in. And you probably got a little nervous because I got a little tripped up in the very beginning, and you thought, well, I better take the lead and really talk here so we don't really mess up Dr. Dream. But Dennis, thank you. Thank you for what you've been doing since you've been doing. You've made a huge difference, and I'm sure you hear it from people all the time, the impact that you've had and that you continue to have. And I honor you for that and for the direct impact that you've had on the direction and the and how my life has unfolded. So this has been fabulous for me, and I'm sure my viewers will love it also. And it would be a treat if one day we were in the same place and I got to meet you in person. I'll look forward to that.
I think inevitably that will happen. Our paths will cross when they're meant to cross. Thank you for being a good host and yeah, safe journeys in all dimensions. So
Thank you.
have a good ramble through Europe and keep your powder dry, so to speak. So all the best.
Thank you, Dennis. Many blessings to you.
Okay, bye bye.